So if we have a goal, if it takes me more than about 15 seconds to explain to a cashier what that goal means, we failed. They have to be goals that everybody can understand so that they can see themselves in the mission, they see themselves in the goal, and they can quickly convert those to, well, if I do this, and that will actually help us to get better at that. And so, it's a struggle, but it's beautiful when it works.
Hey there, senior leader, and welcome to the Talent Sherpa podcast. This is where senior leaders come to rethink how human capital really works. I'm your host, Jackson Lynch, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Scott Morris. He's a former CHRO with a scar tissue to prove it, a genuine believer in the power of leg day, and the founder of Propulsion AI. Hey, Scott, I want you to imagine walking into a board meeting and saying, we need to invest more in our people. And then look for the CFO's eyes to glaze over, because I think that phrase has really been ruined. It sounds soft. It sounds like something that HR says when they want to sound smart, but they can't actually connect their work to quantifiable business outcomes. But here's the thing. I worked for a guy early in my career who's proved all of that wrong. He has demonstrated that people first is, in fact, an operating strategy.
You know, I have heard the emptiness of that statement more times than I can tell you, and I am so excited to have this conversation today. But before we dive in, do us a favor, folks, and subscribe to the podcast, or leave us a comment, or drop us a quick review on your preferred platform. It's how we grow the pod. It's how we keep it sharp for senior leaders. So Jackson, obviously, I know who you're talking about, and we're going to bring him on in a few minutes. That's what's known in the business as a tease. But first, let's set the table for why this matters so much right now. And I think we need to challenge some of the conventional wisdom about how we even talk about people and performance, don't you?
I do, because every CHRO has heard some version of people are our greatest asset. Like it's on the wall, it's in the annual report. But I tell you, I think most of the time it's meaningless. And the moment that margins get tight, that asset becomes a line item to cut. And the standard HR response to this is to talk about engagement. And we've talked about that on pods numerous before, but the Gallup 2025 report shows that global engagement continues to struggle. It fell to 21%. And of course, everyone wrings their hands, and then consultants sell surveys, and we all nod along because engaged employees must be better employees, right?
Well, the data seems to support it. Gallup says that engaged organizations see 51% less turnover. They see 23% higher productivity. Those are real numbers.
Think about this. We measure engagement and we see that companies with high engagement also have better performance. But what if engagement isn't the thing that's actually driving the performance? What if engagement is just a symptom of something else, like a byproduct of some kind?
So what I hear you saying is we may be chasing the shadow instead of the substance.
Exactly. What if the actual causal mechanism is something different? What if it's clarity? What if it's a genuine investment in people? What if it is the leadership expectations for the operators? And engagement just happens to rise when you do those things well.
You know, that I think might account for why so many companies run engagement surveys and they implement recommendations and they see absolutely zero change in business outcomes. It's because they're optimizing for the metric and not for the thing that produces that metric.
Right. They're treating engagement like the end state. But engagement isn't the end state. Performance outcomes driven through people is, in fact, the end state. So engagement's just a measure, and it's not, depending on which survey you're using, not even usually the best one.
What's the alternative then? If we stop chasing engagement scores, what do we chase?
I think there are two things. First, clarity. Do people know what winning looks like? Do they understand the expectations of their role? Is there a shared definition of success? And is that definition specific enough for us to be able to act on? And the second is genuine investment in the culture, not pizza parties, not wellness apps, with all due respect to my folks in Total Rewards. I'm talking about actual investment in capability and development towards a defined outcome in people leaders, in creating conditions where people can thrive and do their best work. And I think that all starts with hiring and demanding leadership throughout the organization.
You know, I think you're right. And I think the argument is if you get clarity and investment right, then performance follows. Engagement might rise too, but that's not why you're doing it. Engagement isn't the end state. It's a symptom of a strong performance culture.
Gallup estimates $438 billion with a B in lost productivity from declining engagement. But what's actually causing that lost productivity? Is it that people aren't engaged? I don't think that's it. I think it may be more that they don't know what's expected of them and they don't have the tools that they need and they're working in chaos.
Gallup's own data shows that 46% of employees feel clear about what's expected of them at work. I mean, that's less than half. And that's down from 56% in 2020.
More than half of the workforce doesn't have clarity on expectations. Now, I personally doubt these expectations are all outcome-based, even when they're there. And they're surprised then when they're not engaged. Engagement isn't the disease. Lack of clarity is the disease. Engagement is the fever.
So the intervention then is not improve engagement. The intervention is create clarity and invest in people. And if you do that, you're going to get better performance. And engagement comes along for the ride.
And that's where most HR functions are stuck, candidly. They are running engagement surveys because they're supposed to. And they implement action plans that treat symptoms. And meanwhile, the underlying cause goes unaddressed. And nobody is asking, do our people actually know what they are trying to accomplish? And do they have what they need to accomplish it?
Well, I'm a guy who has screwed up engagement surveys about every other way that you can screw them up across the 25 years that I've been doing this. And I think the question and what I came to toward the mid part of my career is, what's the operating system that gets you the actual results? HR consultants are pushing faddish best practices. Performance reviews are stuck in like the 1940s. Engagement pulse surveys sort of reign without any link to business outcomes. And don't get me started on recognition platforms. I like it conceptually, but they're all treating symptoms and none of them really gets down to the root cause. So what does it look like when somebody actually focuses on the causal mechanism, to use your word? Clarity and investment, not engagement theater.
And to be able to answer that question, it's why we have a guest today. And I'm going to introduce him because for me, this one's quite personal. Tony Sarsam is a guy I used to work for. He was the president of Nestle USA's direct store delivery division when I worked there. He's the best guy ever, candidly. And he built the world's largest frozen DSD network. It served Nestle pizza and ice cream businesses. And he did it by actually believing in the people doing the work. And then we had built that business and we ended up acquiring Kraft Pizza. And the whole deal had synergies that were tied directly to people costs, primarily having fewer people and paying the ones who remained less, while uprooting almost every single part of the employment proposition. And when we were done with the work, not only had we over-delivered the synergies and delivered them early, we had the highest org health scores across Nestle. How the heck does that happen? The answer is Tony Sarsam. And since then, Tony's been the CEO 3 times at Ready Pack Foods, where he reversed 6 years of declining sales and grew revenue 50% and had a really good exit. Had Borden Dairy, he led a restructuring that preserved 100% of the frontline jobs, which, having gone through that, is really freaking hard to do. And at Spartan Nash recently, he delivered record adjusted EBITDA 3 years running and drove a 192% total shareholder return before the company's sale recently to C&S Wholesale Grocers. And here is what I want our listeners to understand. Tony didn't drive those results by chasing engagement scores or the latest HR fad. He achieved them by creating clarity and genuinely investing in people. And he calls that people first. And the performance followed. So Tony, with that really long wind up, welcome to the Talent Sherpa podcast.
It is a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So Tony, Scott and I were just arguing, and I think you may have heard this in the kind of pre-work, that engagement might be a symptom, not the cause, and that the real driver of performance is clarity and investment in people. How does that resonate with how you think about it?
I think it's spot on. I think whether you call it a symptom or you call it a part of the outcomes, it's something you get when you make the right investments and you do the right things to create the environment where people can do their best work. I've likened it often to, we had a discussion back a zillion years ago when I started my career about organization morale, for example, which is sort of the surrogate for engagement before we knew that longer word. it was, I remember we talked about it, and I remember coming to the conclusion that was really an outcome. That you think about the great baseball team, and what do they have? Like, I watched my favorite team celebrating in downtown Los Angeles a couple months back, and they seem to have really great morale. They're finishing each other's sentences. They're high five. They look like the most collegial team ever. And why is that? It's because they won. And how did they win? They won because they pitched and they hit well. How'd they get there? Well, they practiced. So you build this thing a brick at a time from the very foundation. And when you create a winning performance culture, then you do that by engaging people, and they will be engaged. And they're engaged because they understand. They understand and they embrace the mission, and they're performing and they're winning.
So, Tony, I want to dig into what Jackson just alluded to a second ago, this philosophy that you call people first. I worked for an organization who said, our philosophy is people first. And I have to tell you, I was disappointed like across the board. When you walked into Spartan Nash or into ReadyPack, you weren't saying, let's improve engagement. You were saying something else entirely. Let's unpack that.
Yeah, so it's important to be clear, as you just mentioned, and straightforward and very simple. So I made a declarative that we're going to be about people first, and I just defined what that was, and then immediately went to work on showing people what it was. And so this thing about making these the people are our greatest asset, or you guys talked about that earlier. It's almost laughable when you hear it, right, in a way. But people first, and as you can imagine, people are going to say, well, I've heard that before. So show me what that really means. And it takes a while to get true believers, but it's important to do the work. Just like I mentioned earlier about the baseball team, you invest in people. You invest. Importantly, when I say invest, it's not just about money. It's about investing emotionally, investing time. It's investing. Really kind of investing your career in a way with this mantra that nothing's more important than the people who work here. You are the most important person to me, and I'm going to make sure this organization values our people first. And you get
Tony, make that simple for me, because I'm a part of the class that made the top half possible. So you got to break the philosophy down and make it super concrete. When you say people first, what does that mean? Just you're important, or does it go beyond that?
It goes way beyond that. So, and the matter of fact, I usually take some time early in the organization to do the definition of what people first is and what it is not. And I think often you learn about what's right more effectively by knowing what something is not. Famously, the 10 Commandments only tell you what not to do, right? so some of these what it isn't are actually pretty helpful. So I think people first is what it's not. It's not person first. Right? People is plural. I'll come back to that a handful of times, but it's about people. It's not about an individual. It's not about solving individual needs or issues. It's about how do we as a people optimize this great organization for the people who work here. So I think that piece of it is important. The other thing is it is absolutely about performance. And what I will talk about today a little bit is that there's no stronger performance culture than a people first culture. It's at the heart of the people first culture. And there are folks saying, well, if it's about people first, it's about who's going to bring the potato salad to the picnic and all that kind of stuff. It's no. People first is about getting a great organization staffed and trained and ready and creating that environment where people can do their best work. But what matters is that best work. I've thought often about when everybody has people. The thing about the people are our greatest asset. If you don't actually make the investment, then what's the point? Everybody has it. People, there's something like 8 billion of us on the planet. But I wouldn't say that people are our greatest asset ever. But I would say, after creating a people first culture, I say these people are our greatest asset.
What's the biggest misconception that when you talk to other people about this, or when you're teaching an organization, what's the big misconception that you got to get past?
Now, the biggest one is that they feel it's a trade-off between focusing on the business results and focusing on individual needs. It's just a little bit what I just described, that what it is and what it isn't. And that's what's tough to get past. It took me a while to get that one past my board, for example, in multiple companies. They hear the message, say, that's great, we love that, blah, 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 but we want to make sure that you also have good performance. And so then I have to start over again. This is about performance. It's all about performance. And it's about how you get better performance, both in the short run and the long run.
My example, I was telling you, I was disappointed with the concept of people first. There was this huge misconception that we were going to hold on to people that weren't necessarily performing what we wanted them to now or what we needed them to in the future. You want to talk about kind of what the role of moving people out of the organization and supporting people within the organization, that balance?
Yeah. A performance culture has to have the right players on the field. And the odds that everybody is the right player on the field is really, really low. You're going to have folks who don't perform. They're not performing in a job. They can move to another job. But the key is you have to know that. And you have to know that not in this sort of a visceral way. You have to know that with real metrics. And so part of a people first culture is about getting real visibility about results and reviewing them and having really explicit accountability for what everybody needs to deliver to the organization, what every function delivers, what every team delivers, what every person delivers. And I have used I don't see any issue with using the old performance management systems to do that. One thing that's really popular in HR is that approximately every 27 months, we change our mind about how we're supposed to do performance reviews. And it's always, and my favorite is the one when they swing back and forth. It was really on vogue not too long ago to say, hey, performance reviews for an annual basis, people need to have more feedback than that. So we're going to get rid of those. We're going to do quarterly reviews. And I asked people that, what was wrong with the old annual review? And the number one thing that came back was that, well, people weren't really doing them. Oh, okay. So you weren't doing the one, but you're pretty sure you do 4, right? The problem is doing one. If you have any meaningful performance discussion with here's what you're accountable for, here's your metrics, here's how you performed, good job, or you need a little bit more help, a little bit more work. If you do anything in that space, it could be a 7-minute discussion once a year. You have outperformed most management in terms of what kind of feedback they provide to their teams. So the key is giving the feedback. The mechanism, not terribly important, but as long as you have to pick metrics that matter, it has to be clear, people understand the accountability, and they understand the consequences. And it is really, really challenging for a longer discussion if you want to have it, getting organizations to embrace an idea that there are real consequences, because most organizations don't have them. Most people, they fire people for fraud, but they don't fire people for poor performance.
There's 2 things that seem to come out in this, Tony. One is this is not a soft strategy. This is a performance strategy. And the other, and you've alluded to it a couple of times, is the role of clarity in this whole thing.
Yeah. There's a number of ways we start with having clarity about what's important for the organization very broadly. And I take my teams through a process of developing what are the important deliverables by function and distilling that down all the way down to the team level and ensuring that those accountabilities are clear, simple, not too many of them. And then we have a process for reviewing the review, so to speak, right? So we still in all my organizations, I've used a performance curve where there's a certain number of people who can get above expectations and a certain number of people by decree who will get below expectation. Really, really, really challenging to do. Every organization's wrestled with it, but it's an important way to move forward, because what it forces you to do is actually acknowledge that here's a person I think has great potential, but they didn't have a great year. They didn't deliver the numbers that we agreed on, and so that means I need to figure out how to get that person back in the saddle and having a great 2026, right? Or if they continue to stack up years when they disappoint, then you need to move on. So again, kind of come back to our last discussion a little bit. It's important to have that clarity about accountability. And the vast majority of people, I can't tell you the exact numbers. I'm going to guess 95+% of the time, when someone hasn't performed well and you need to make a move and put them on a performance improvement plan or fire them, they know it's coming. They absolutely know it's coming because you've made that. There's no surprises in an organization where you have great clarity and visibility. I didn't talk a lot about visibility. I can go on a little bit more about that as well, because there's a clarity piece about on an individual basis. But the other thing about what are the goals the organization's chasing, that is very, very important. The organization has a simple template of here's the things that are going to make us successful this year, and I can see myself in those numbers.
So I want to push back a little bit, Tony, on what you said about we don't manage bottom performers or underperformers well. While that is absolutely true, I I'm not sure that is where I would start if I were inside an organization. It's having adequate performers in the roles that have an outsized impact on the outcomes of the organization. But all of that, back to your point, comes to having a really strong understanding of what things matter more than others, and building everything from there. And when we worked together, we built something. I think it was, I can't remember what it was called, a statement of identity. The work that Andy did with us. Can you talk a little bit about that mission clarity, and what is that statement of identity, and why does it matter?
Yeah. Great point. And to be clear, I would never start a conversation with, here's the things that are going to get you fired. But starting with mission clarity actually does make a lot of sense. So that's that overarching thing that I mentioned a few minutes ago. And we've used the group dialect now. I've used them 4 times to do this exact same task. And what I find is that you'll go into an organization, and it could run the gamut. You can have a situation where they have a pretty good mission and a pretty good statement of what matters, and you need to tweak it a little bit for the realities of what's coming up next in the world. Or you can look at it and say, this is a do-over. I got to start from scratch. And I'd say that's run about 50-50 in my career. But bringing people in and having them, what I call kind of writing the story about our identity as an organization, what's going to matter to us. We start with what's a long range vision for our organization. What's the mission that we're on, kind of every day, every week, every month as we move forward. What are the core capabilities that are going to be important for us to hone as we move forward as an organization? What are the behaviors that we value the most? And finally, we have this thing called the signature strength. And the signature strength is essentially, what is the difference that we make for our customer? And it has to be a difference that is uniquely defensible because of who we are and what we do. So that's sort of the overall story. Now, what I do is I make sure that I want to get at least 10% of the organization involved in the crafting of that. And at Spartan Nash, for example, we had 20,000 employees. I had 2,000 people who participated in focus groups and in surveys. So the words that we mined for the organization came from the organization. And we synthesized those and turned that into what we call at Spartan Nash, what's called our winning recipe. And then we got all those goals I talked about earlier. Everything winds up on somebody's performance appraisal, or winds up on the wall, or winds up in the break room. They all come from that statement of identity.
And we did that back in Nestle DSD days, and it was about reliability, which really wasn't the sexiest of things to rally around.
Yeah.
But even when you focused on something with that degree of clarity, you could create the story. And I've shared it on the pod here before, where reliability mattered. We had the one guy who had 26 stops, and the car breaks, his truck breaks down on the first stop, and he goes and he gets the tow truck driver, and he has his box truck towed to the next 25 stops. Like, that's reliability. And you create the stories. And I think we brought him to Disneyland and brought his family in. Like, the identity that helps build in the organization is really, really powerful. And you can create cool stories on that. Now at ReadyPack, if memory serves, it was all about bowls per minute. Like, tell me about how you land on that one as a signature strength.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't technically our signature strength, but what we found was that in order for us to separate ourselves, we had to be much more efficient. We had pretty solid innovation as a company. We had a market lead on our key product. But for us to invest in that product and invest in the things that were going to work for our customer, frankly, we needed to be more efficient. We needed more margin, and we could not charge more. And so then the thing that was the sort of the opener for that ultimately was we were selling salad bowls. And if we could increase the throughput of those, it really turned on a lot of profitability. And so we got the whole organization focused on BPM, bowls per minute. And so everybody had goals. They had goals in every one of the plants individually, lines. They'd celebrate when they hit a certain benchmark of the bowls per minute. And it was exciting to see that. And it's a little bit, you think about that guy who had his truck towed. And why did he make that decision? When a lot of other folks would say, "Oh, my truck broke down. We'll get him again tomorrow." Well, because he got the mission, right? And he got the mission because that was something that was part of our culture. It was embedded deep in the culture that we were going to serve that customer. We talked about it in the absolute sense through our signature strength. We talked about it in terms of what it meant to him, because he had performance review and compensation based on him being reliable. And so it was natural. And the same thing with the bowls per minute. When I got there, the Ready Pack, they had struggled for a long time to get their bowls per minute up and improving. And once it became something that was owned by everybody, then the blinders came off. People started figuring out ways to actually increase the line speed, and it was terrific. We made really amazing. I think our bowls per minute one of our manufacturing plants was up like 4 times over the few years I was there.
So guys, can I clarify something or have both of you clarify something? It sounds to me like the signature strength is not a value statement, the way that you put it in practice, that it's a metric. Do I hear it right? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, not necessarily metric. It's how you define what difference you make for your customer, right? So it could be something that's a little bit higher than that, but we would always populate metrics to tell us, hey, are we making progress on that thing, right? So same thing with our core capabilities, but also have to have metrics underneath them. So in this case, the difference we made for our customer about delivering great innovation at every point across the country was only going to be unlocked with the movement on profitability. So that's why it became a natural metric for it. But you wouldn't necessarily have on your identity statement a metric. You would have a statement about the difference you make, and then the metrics change year in and year out about how you unlock that.
So one of the things I've seen as I've moved past working with Tony is I've gotten to different organizations and those that I've either been inside directly or coaching other CHROs or in my advisory practice. And I ask them what's important to them as an organization. And they pull out a dashboard that has like 47 metrics on it. The worst I saw was this is a true story. We literally had 122 pages that would go out every Sunday night for us to talk about during our leadership teams the following morning. And one of the challenges that goes with that is, how do you know what's important? So I go all the way back to the work, Tony, that you and I did. And I think this was very much part of the PepsiCo Frito-Lay organization of focusing on a small number of critical KPIs and talk about those incessantly. So maybe what I'd love to hear from you is how most companies who start with kind of a scattershot approach. I'm going to shoot the buckshot and see what it hits. How do you get that pulled down into a short list? What's the process that you use, and how balance both the hard measures and the other elements of your culture that are really important in that?
Yeah, it's great. It's a great question. It's a real struggle for people to find a small number of things that can make you successful. But I think it's just so critically important to do that. And what I've tasked, as you recall, Jackson, I tasked my executive leadership team with, they're going to take the first crack at it, right? And invariably they come back with too many and they're too complicated. And what I tell folks in general as we're constructing them is that first of all, you're going to find, I tell them 5. I'll accept a little more than 5 if we can't get off 5. I think one year I had as many as 9. I'm still embarrassed to this day that I allowed that to happen. But I would say on average, 6 or 7. And they have to be measures that if we hit each one of those measures, hit in the range of those aspirations, then practically speaking, no matter what else happens, we're gonna have a great year, right? So you'd always have some of your most important, like the superordinate goal might be EBITDA. It's going to wind up on there. The other one that the team would struggle with is that I remind them that I'm going to talk about these every day. I'm going to do my period video that we send out to the field. I'm going to do it at town halls. We're going to post it in all whether it's plants or distribution centers or stores or whatever. And everybody needs to understand it. So if we have a goal, if it takes me more than about 15 seconds to explain to a cashier what that goal means, we failed. They have to be goals that everybody can understand, so that they can see themselves in the mission, they see themselves in the goal, and they can quickly convert those to, well, if I do this, and that will actually help us to get better at that. And so, it's a struggle, but it's beautiful when it works. You have those 5 or 6 elements that you talk about every day. You show the progress on them. You talk about in my period videos that I do, I would peel off on one and say, here's a little bit more detail on what we're working on and some things that you can think about in your locations. So I think that simplicity and clarity is important. And if you don't have that, if you have really, really complicated goals, they're probably not the right goals. And because of the right thing to shoot for and the right thing to do is usually always pretty straightforward. So I press my team into making sure that they offer that gift to the organization.
Yeah, let me double click on that a little bit just to make sure that our listeners and viewers have an opportunity to hear what Tony just said, because I think it's so important. First is, if you have too many KPIs, you don't have any. It's like the old adage that if you have two quarterbacks, you don't have one.
Mm-hmm.
The second is, we talk a lot about the clarity mandate and making sure that everyone knows what is expected of them at work. It's the first and most important question on the Gallup survey. This is how you do it. And it's both in terms of truncating the numbers to the ones that really, really have outsized impact, and also to make sure that they are translatable all throughout the organization. Because that, I think, creates a shared focus for the entire organization, and allows you to consistently, reinforce what matters. So Tony, I would talk to me a little bit before we move on as to how you pick which ones are in there. Are they all clear performance measures, or are there other things that have people implications to it? Like, how do you balance the what and the how in those top five?
Yeah, it's challenging. I would tell you that we'd always want to have at least one of them that makes a statement about our care, and so we try to find the right one for that. So sometimes it's often about safety, for example. I've had that one has been a leading indicator a great many times, and that one, and we couch it that way. We couch it about caring and not about, we want to make sure we save money on work comp costs. So that's an idea, and we look for, are there any other things in our process that are holding us back from being successful in terms of the people equation. One idea I used a great many times, because it was a big deal coming out of COVID, was overall retention. So we had a retention goal amongst our top five, and that would obviously elicit a lot of activities that you'd have to work on to actually help retain people at your site. Not a difficult concept. We don't want people to leave. Pretty straightforward. What can you do? Well, you can be part of the welcome, right? You can be part of the training team. You can be part of the folks that actually help them, give them feedback, whatever. There's a great number of things. And so those are we look at what are some of the process inputs that are really important, and we'd always have one or two of those. And then beyond that, we'd have one or two things that are kind of key levers to unlock overall sales or profitability, some of those superordinate goals. So like bowls per minute would have been one of them, right? That would have been one that would have been on the top five, and it would have been one that was a really important one for unlocking our overall profitability. So I don't think it's a real science to your question. There's a little bit of art in figuring out how you balance some of those inputs versus the outputs. But again, it's one of those things where you get it done, you put it on the wall, and you stare at it and say, if we did those things, do we think we're going to have a great year? And the answer to that feels like yes. Then we're going full steam ahead.
I love it. It's built on business performance first, and then thinking about how we use the workforce to achieve that business performance, and it creates a spot where everybody fits. And it sounds to me, Tony, like people first for you is built on two foundations. One is mission clarity, the way I heard it, evidenced by a statement of identity and a signature strength, and performance clarity, which is achieved through 6 or 7, maybe 5 to 9, if we're abroad in the range, KPIs. Let's talk about who owns what. When you and Jackson and I were warming up and sort of getting to know each other, you said something that really stuck with me, because it's a thing that I think almost every organization gets wrong. They want the head of HR to be the chief culture officer. When the three of us were talking initially, you said the CEO has to be the chief culture officer. And I fell in love with you, man, because I think that's true. What does it actually look like when the CEO is the chief culture officer?
Great question. And I think, I want to spend some time at the end talking about what if your CEO isn't going to be the chief culture officer? What do you do with that? But the real opener, it has to be the CEO to be. If you're going to make really rapid fire progress in culture, people need to see it at the top. There's no substitute for that. And the CEOs, as what I think is sort of an abdication, sometimes they'll tap their CHRO to do that kind of work because, hey, their surname is human, right? So they must know something about this. But it's not. If it's really important, then it has to be important to the CEO. And it was one of my subordinates told me early on. He said, "What interests my boss fascinates me." So if I said something was sort of important, then it became really, really important to people who worked with me. And It's harder to do that when the CEOs, it feels like they're either indifferent or they can't be bothered with some things. So I drive a very aggressive agenda on that. I am out front. I talk about the importance of people first. I lead things in all of our meetings, so everything from our executive leadership team meeting to a town hall. We always start with people. One thing I came back to, I was at a board conference. They're talking about how many of you have people on your board agenda. And I was shocked that not everybody raised their hand. I figured, well, everyone has to have people on, but they don't. And so our board agenda, for example, we not only have people on our agenda, we start with people. The first thing we talk about, we do not review the financials first. We review a cultural update first. And that discussion is led by me, not by our CHRO. So I lead the discussion about what happened, what are the things we accomplished in terms of moving the culture forward, what are some of the recognition events that we did, what are some things we did in the communities that were meaningful to our communities and to our people. And that's how we start the conversation. And it makes a real impact when you say, I'm going to start with that, and then we'll get to the financials later. So anyway, I think the CEO has to model that, and they have to model that with their time and what they actually do and how they actually engage people.
Yeah, we've actually talked a lot about being able to understand the altitude of the mandate by where the HR people stuff shows up in the deck. And if it's at the front and it's a different lens on the strategy, then it is clearly a high altitude and it's connected in, and it's part of the business agenda, not running adjacent to it. But to your point, there are so many of the board decks that are in there. The people slides are at the bottom, and they're the ones that get compressed when we have not enough time left in the meeting, and someone needs to go take a phone call. But let me pull it back and ask you this, Tony. If the CEO owns culture, where's the value add in the CHRO in a people first environment?
Well, the CEO doesn't own culture. The CEO is a chief culture officer. So the CEO is going to lead the culture, but everybody has to own culture. And as a matter of fact, when I bring people into my organization, it's one of the important things that I do is I look for, is this person going to actually be able to fit within an environment that's going to focus on people first. And not everybody has that in their background or their training, and a lot of people can't articulate that when you talk to them. So I think that's an important distinguishing element to what you just said, is that we all own it. I'm going to be the chief culture officer, but I expect my team to actually take the torch and do their part. So what does the CHRO do? To me, they run the machine. We have things that we need to get done. We're going to say we're going to invest a certain amount of money on training. That's a big strategy for us, or whatever. The CHRO will likely have a disproportionate role in composing what are the things we're going to do, how we're going to schedule that, how we're going to get people access to that training, those kinds of things. So the tools that we use to kind of bring the big ideas to life are going to be primarily owned by the CHRO. And so, in my teams, I've done a number of important transformational endeavors, or someone called them turnarounds. And so I brought on a lot of new people. Usually, 80 to 90% of my team is a different team by the time I'm there for a year and a half, because I'm working through and trying to get this team put together. I use one recruiter to do that, as you know, Jackson, you're part of that club. And I do that because I hold him accountable to put together the team, not to hire a bunch of individuals to check a box on things they've done. So I put together the team. The team has to reverence that, and they have to know that their role is to move this overall organization forward in a people first manner. To some degree, the details of who does what in that are not so important. I have used, at one point, I had the most important work we were doing on people first for a while was a statement of identity at Ready Pack. I had my CIO lead it because he had energy for it. He liked it. He'd done it before. Great. And he did a great job. So I'm a big believer in this thing. If you get a great team that have the right mission, they'll pitch in. They want the ball at the end of the game, so to speak. And you can have a lot of people do a lot of things. I have a highly disproportionate amount of my people first activities in my last two organizations were parked in comms, for example. So and it made sense. I mean, for a lot of reasons. And again, for a segue, if you want to go deeper on that, I'd be happy to do that. But that's but running the machine. Everyone has their role in kind of running this machine. We decided what we're going to do. What's my role in it as a senior leader? What's my team's role in that as mid-level management to make sure that we have the success that we prefer?
Tony, I know Jackson and I have lived this one, and we haven't talked about it, but I suppose you have too. There are some CEOs who are really, really good at talking the game about culture and about people and how important they are, and then they reward things that run completely opposite to that narrative. Kind of talk a little bit about both what you've seen and your advice about the nonverbal stuff and what CEOs should be doing in that chief culture officer role that's nonverbal, that signals culture is important.
Yeah, it's a very rich topic. So on one hand, just a very short answer is that if somebody's doing something that is antithetical to what you want to do in people first, you can say, well, that person needs training or whatever. I got here and they were here and they were doing that. But there's a time in people's brain between the time when that is that person's problem and it eventually becomes your problem. That you are, if a person 2 layers below me is not practicing people first and practicing bad behaviors, then 6, 9, 12 months in a row, that is 100% my problem now, because I've actually allowed that to proceed. And I said, why would Tony allow an organization to do blah, 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 blah? So you have to move quickly in terms of getting people aligned to the importance of the mission. And if people can't step up, then they're best off being part of the Alumni Association. That's one element of what you just mentioned. But there are so many moments of truth that come up in an organization where you have an opportunity to demonstrate something. And I think part of it is, as a leader, and this is no matter what you're, a CEO or frontline supervisor, practice those things in your head. What would I do if blah, blah, blah. And there's been some, we had an associate of ours who was shot and killed in one of our stores, and a customer same day with a shooter. And I remember I got on the phone, and this is the first time we had a tragedy of this magnitude since I've been at Spartan-Nash. And the team got into, there's an element of shock, right? So what are we going to do? And they got into the sort of the 2017 Spartan-Nash playbook, right? They'd all been through this people first journey now for 3.5 years at that point. But again, now you're tapping into something that's brand new. And so they started talking about, what are we obligated to do? What's the cap on the money we might recover from insurance and blah, blah, blah. And at one point I had to stop the conversation with, guys, I want you to stop being that and let's be human for the rest of this call, right? And what really makes sense for the families. And we got to a very different place. And you know what? It wasn't like there was a huge cost burden or whatever. But I talked to 2 other retailers had the same thing happen. And they started with how they managed the cost of the calamity. And I'm thinking, I don't know what could be less people first than talking about, I know your daughter was just murdered in one of my stores, but you understand we have limits. I mean, it's crazy. So that was an important moment of truth. I participated in the call. It was an insurance call, but I jumped on because I feared that we might not go down the right path, and I was right. And so that's one example. It's sort of a big, dramatic, dark one, but there's all kinds of things that happen where you've got a chance to say, hey, I can go this way or that way. Conventionally speaking, I should go that way. But you know what? In a people-first organization, I need to go that way. And take those risks. I'll share one other one that's on investment. When I was at ReadyPack, we learned that we were on the cusp of not being able to be a viable business without creditors on our back anymore. And I presented my plan, and my plan included giving big pay raises to the front line. And the board kind of lost their mind. So here's another idea. At this point, we just had a union campaign that had just wrapped up in one place that we won, and we had not given raises, real raises, for years. And I had a suggestion from one of the board members. So what if we do this? How about if we hit our numbers, when we get through this rough patch, we hit our numbers, and we'll do some kind of profit sharing or something. I remember telling this to the chairman of the board. I told him that, after not giving pay increases for the last 4 or 5 years, you have surrendered the opportunity for such creativity. What we need to do now is get back to the good old fashioned, here's what people need in their lives. Here's what the signal they need from us to show that we care. And we're going to do that. And they hemmed and hawed and argued and finally just said, you guys I had just gotten there. And I said, you had a plan of some sort and it didn't work. And you got us to this place. I'll show you my plan. You can pick either one. I'm telling you right this minute, I think my plan is the best you've got. I don't like the options that we have with following your ropes. And they shut up and we did it. We wound up having a great outcome. But that was an important moment of truth because I got a brand new board, brand new chairman of the board, and had members of my team in there. And the thing to do, conventionally speaking, was say, let us go back and we'll present another idea about how we're going to do this so it doesn't kind of tank, it doesn't hurt us in this truck. Or you can kind of get right back in the grill and say, here's what we need to do. And what's the worst thing's going to happen? The worst thing's going to happen, they were going to fire me. I mean, I was thinking in my head, I was looking for a job when I found this one. So, but they were not going to do that. But they're looking for, in a way, and this happens a lot, it'll happen everything from a forklift operator to the chairman of the board. They will test your resolve. They're going to test, are you really serious about this? And you'll have all kinds of examples that come up. So long-winded to answer your question, I apologize, but there are so many moments of truth. You got to practice them. You got to make it what makes sense to me. What principles am I going to stand for, and always stand for them. And that makes a big difference in the organization.
Tony, that's an incredibly good example. And I like it because it's a big example of what you're doing at the top. But when you get down to the front line, I think that's where you make it or break it. I'm pretty sure you're going to agree with a statement like that. What do you do with an operator who hits every single number that you want them to hit, but destroys people in the process? The high performer who's a culture killer.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, destroying people doesn't give you great results in the long run. So this is the culture killers are the folks who are they're in a job just for enough time to actually get good numbers and do damage and move on before the actual aftermath of that damage comes home to roost, so to speak. So we have so in our accountabilities that we review very thoroughly, folks, we talk about process and how important all those process elements are, and the process elements weigh heavily. We've had folks who had. I remember I had one guy who was, and I can't remember where he was in the organization, but I think he was a director, and he was killing it on the numbers. But his reputation was not good from a people standpoint. He had not done the things that we'd asked him to do in terms of people first, and we gave him a needs below expectation or needs improvement, we called it at the time, because he didn't follow the process, and so we knew those results were not sustainable because of that. So again, that's another one. You got to be true to what you say, and to say if the process matters, and somebody is really, as you mentioned, they're really doing a lot of damage with people. Then that becomes the thing, and that becomes the thing above the short-term results they might have achieved.
Yeah, going all the way back to our PepsiCo world, we were, I think, one of the first companies to separate the what from the how in a formal way in the process. Mm-hmm. And I can go all the way back and say, boy, we could not have created a more complex rubric to get to the outcome in there. But the instinct, I think, was sound. And to Tony's point, and one of the things that he's taught me is you have to make the right call with the people who are leaving dead bodies on the side, and because culture is, among other things, decision residue, and the decision residue of who you tolerate is really important. Now, I want to switch this real quick to, one of my pet peeves is going to these darn conferences and listening to a whole bunch of stuff that is so pie in the sky that it can't possibly be something that I can work on, even if it's good. And candidly, sometimes it's not that good. So,
yeah.
At the risk of doing that to our listeners today, Tony, what would you say to the CHRO who's listening right now and is nodding along and saying, "Boy, I'd like to work for you, but my CEO that I'm working for today is totally not ever going to go for this"? What do you tell them?
Yeah, I tell them that you've got to sort of grow where you're planted a little bit, and got these tools by practicing them on my way up sort of the organization. And in some cases, I had good modeling. In most cases, I did not. And so I tried things, and I learned from them, and I took some risks. I did things that the organization wasn't doing, but generally speaking, I got good results. And so folks said, well, that was an interesting process. Maybe we should other people do it. But things like, I'll tell you one around clarity, for example, and visibility. Everybody has that option. Everybody can create better clarity, can create better visibility about what matters, can create feedback loops to the people in their organization that both are instructive about what things need to be changed and recognize and reward people for the things that they've done well. Because I held my operators accountable for this thing I call 2X fun. And what was on their accountability was that every year they had to make work twice as fun as it was the previous year. Obviously, a subjective measure, but people had to talk about it. They had to talk about what did you do? What thing did you do to make it more fun and engaging at work this year? And so I think that, and I did that as a mid-level manager, right? And I carried that with me all the way. So creating visibility, creating a real accountability with the people you work with, creating an environment where you say, I care about you. And I'm going to create an environment where we have fun and we recognize great results. People can do that, and they can start changing the culture from the middle. I would tell you, when we were at PepsiCo, as you mentioned a minute ago, we had a handful of people from PepsiCo who came in from outside the organization, as you may recall, right? Didn't have much of an impact on the culture, even though they didn't know what they were doing all the time. But that culture was so strong. It was strong because the middle of the organization owned the culture. And so people can make a difference. They can make a big difference as a frontline supervisor, mid-level manager. There's all kinds of things that you have access to start creating that people first movement and that revolution on your own team.
Let me drive us to Jackson to build on what you just started, which is practicality. Tony, Jackson and I do this thing called the playbook on every episode. We try and get it down to the things that a CHRO can start to do right now this week. And I want to get your reflection on them. If you were going to give CHROs a piece of advice about one thing that they can start, what's your piece of advice?
I think visibility about performance, and that's from the CHRO's perspective. That's going to be mostly about kind of performance reviews, right? The way we kind of summarize performance. For my teams, I allow people to kind of take the ball and run with it, so to speak. If I wanted my CHRO to take a bigger stand with performance, they have for the freedom to say, hey, here's a way we can project these results more clearly in the warehouse organizations, for example. But I think this thing about making sure that that the performance is visible and that people are being held accountable in a way that holds the team accountable. The other thing, my CHROs on my team anyway have generally we work as a team, and there's this notion about mutual accountability. And I've always had CHROs that are not afraid to stir it up with the rest of the team. Jackson was very subtle in the way he did it, for example. But everybody, that was important, and that was not something that was just about permission. You had to take it and say that, look, guys, we need to get better in this thing here. Here's where I can help. I can help on the performance management side of it. I can help with finding better tools for how you give feedback to your frontline supervisors. So I think that the simplify, get the simplified version of how you get performance feedback and visibility out there. I think that's what I'd work on as a CHRO trying to rebuild.
Tony, here's something that I have picked up, not only listening to you now in this conversation, but in the other ones that we've had. You can't have 50 KPIs. You got to get down to the things that really matter. Cut the list in half, at least 6 to 8 KPIs that are really tied to what is going to make you a better business. And I think that, driving that as a CHRO, that's something we can start doing. Driving how many are there? Are they the right ones? Do people really understand them?
Yep.
If you want to be a part of the business agenda, that is the conversation to be had with the CEO and the CFO and the board, right? That's the nexus of that level of conversation, because the intuition of the CEO is we need to put everything that matters, and the CFO probably will expand upon that. To the point that Tony made earlier, it's got to be those 5 things that you can talk about consistently, regularly, and make an impact, which I think leads to the thing I would say that we can start doing tomorrow if you're listening to this, and that is really testing the clarity of, have you defined what winning looks like for your team this quarter? And you don't have to do that for the entire organization. Do it for yours. Best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. Second best time is today. Best way to drive an organization is to do it enterprise-wide. But if you can't do that, do it with the place where you have control. And if you can define what winning looks like for your team for this quarter, that answer is going to help you determine whether you have a clarity problem or if you have a broader alignment problem. Tony, where do you think these get the most resistance from what you've seen?
Well, There's a number of places. One is I think it can be challenging for the CHRO to suggest to the operator, here's the things that you need to do a little differently, right? So that's always a great conversation, right? So there's some of that. I think I found as I try to put myself in the place of somebody on my team and doing these things, I think that component is really maybe a little bit what I just said. The mutual accountability is challenging. Right now, that if we're going to do something, and I need you to participate in this way, I think that can be challenging. That's why sometimes you got to step back, do things, model them, show people is probably the best way to get that moving forward. But I've seen my team struggle with those things where it's sort of hard to get these if you're a C-suite person, you're kind of an alpha personality typically, and sometimes it's hard. It's hard for folks to say, okay, yeah, I'll do it your way.
Yeah, look, how you have the conversation with the operators on here's where we need to be more focused and leading. I get it that's hard. I've had the trepidation to have those conversations as well. But here's the reality. We talk a lot about our role is looking at the organization through a talent lens and trying to figure out what are we trying to accomplish and what are the constraints from talent that are getting in the way of business performance. And if you have the conversation more broadly, by placing it in that context, we by being more simple and focused and clear with people, will get more alignment around what is important, which will ultimately turn into better performance outcomes. That's a different conversation than just saying, I want to give you some feedback on your style. That part is a absolute showstopper. But look, the question, the conversation is no doubt scary. So let's move in now to the most important part of our sessions together, and that is the Talent Sherpa Summary, which, as I think most of you guys know, Scott says things. And what he said today was just amazing to me. Bowls per minute will set you free.
I've never said that, but I have a different interpretation of that one. All right, here's the summary. Number one, people first is a performance strategy. It's not a soft strategy. If you listen to Tony and follow his system, he delivered 192% shareholder return and 40% turnover reduction at the same time by making it an operating system. Second, engagement is a symptom. It's not a cause, and we have got to stop optimizing for engagement scores. Third, clarity is the foundation. If you're following Tony's system, you need a statement of identity with a signature strength, and you need 5 to 9 KPIs that really define winning in the business context. Here's the most important part of that. If people don't know what's expected, nothing else matters. And fourth, the CEO is the chief culture officer. HR enables it. HR challenges. But if you don't have CEO buy-in yet, then build the proof in your own domain. Make the results undeniable and work the equation that way. Tony, what do you think I got right? What do you think I missed?
I think you nailed it. The one thing I would add to it is a very subtle importance of making the declaration early that I and we are about people first. It's a challenge. It sets up everything you just said. Now I got to do that in a lens that actually proves that what I said was actually reality.
Yeah, and the takeaway for me is kind of linking it all the way back to where we started the pod today. We've been treating engagement like it's the goal when it's not. It's a thermometer. The actual goal is performance through people. The mechanism is clarity and investment. And if you get those two things right, then you don't need to worry about engagement. All of that will take care of itself. So, Tony, I want to say thank you so much for being so generous with your time and your insights today. It's been a masterclass, no doubt. And where can people follow you and learn more about your work?
Oh, great. I have a blog that you can check out. Tony, it's real hard. It's a real tough one. It's Tony Sarsam. You'll find it with a handful of my musings on life and people first.
And thank you so much for tuning into the Talent Sherpa podcast. As you know, this is where senior leaders come to rethink how human capital really works. And like I say every week, this is so much fun to do with y'all. And I want to give a quick shout out to one of our favorite listeners. Hello, Suda from San Jose. Thank you for being a part of the Talent Sherpa community. And we thank everyone listening, whether that is in Bangkok, Thailand, Hillsborough, New Jersey, or Moscow in the Russian Federation. Gagdila.
If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor, please subscribe. Hit that like button or leave us a review on your favorite platform, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. We're all over all three of those. It's free. It's a small favor you can do for us and potentially a big favor you do for someone else.
If you're a CHRO wondering where to start your AI journey, don't forget to check out Propulsion AI at the cleverly titled www.getpropulsion.ai. They're building a team of AI teammates to help human capital leaders focus on what matters most to the business.
And if you are a first-time CHRO or an emerging CHRO, don't forget, Talent Sherpa is your ultimate guide for HR leadership, for tackling the high-stakes peaks of business leadership. From the best-selling Substack that Jackson writes to deep dive sessions, it's your Sherpa up the CHRO Summit. Head over to mytalentsherpa.com or subscribe to book a coaching session today.
And thank you, Scott. And thanks again, Tony. Again, best guy I've ever worked for, bar none. And thanks to everyone who's listening. Until next time, keep raising the bar. Keep finding your signature strength. And keep on climbing.